And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a wonderful panel this morning, and a wonderful panel who I'll ask to introduce themselves in just a moment. But a panel that can give you a really rich insight into this particular topic, and a panel which can give you an insight from different perspectives. So a panel will give you an insight from the academic perspective, from the small business perspective, but also from the large pharma perspective as well into this particular topic. But just before I ask the panel to introduce themselves, what I'd like to do is just share with you some initial thoughts around why Takeda engages in pre-competitive partnerships and the types of pre-competitive partnerships that we engage in. So my name is Sean Breen, and so as part of my role at Takeda, I lead engagement in public-private partnerships globally within Takeda. Now, we engage in 45 large public-private partnerships where we collaborate with a multitude of different organizations around the world. And of those 45 partnerships, about a third of them are based out of Europe or have a significant component in Europe. Some of them are within the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI, which you have heard about yesterday, and also in the Structural Genomics Consortium, the SGC, and I'm sure you'll hear more from Chaz around the SGC as we get into the panel discussion. So that's one form or one flavor, if you like, of pre-competitive partnerships, public-private partnerships. We also engage in a multitude of other types of partnerships, smaller partnerships, where we have Takeda scientists working alongside academic scientists, where they're sharing data, they're sharing expertise. And really what we're looking to do is to transform really cool science and really interesting science into innovative medicines for patients, and really to translate that great science into innovative medicines. So what do we typically contribute into these types of pre-competitive partnerships? Well, we contribute data, and we share data. We contribute compounds, and we also contribute part of our compound library into these types of partnerships. But also importantly, and something you would have heard from the previous discussion and the previous panel discussion, we contribute people's time. And typically that's cross-functional teams, and that's cross-functional expertise from our teams in the global environment to bring different perspectives to move great new science through and translate it into innovative medicines. And it's really that people piece which is really important in translating those good ideas into new medicines. So there are lots of different types of pre-competitive partnerships, and you'll hear a flavor of that from the panel in just a moment. We contribute into those partnerships, but we also gain a lot, and we gain significant insight from those partnerships, which allows us to speed up clinical development and move our medicines through clinical development. So what I'd like to do now is just ask the panel to introduce themselves and briefly introduce themselves. And as they do introduce themselves, I'd like to ask them also to give their initial thoughts on the value they see in pre-competitive partnerships. And maybe Chaz, if I could ask you to start the introductions.
Well, thanks, Sean, and good morning, everybody. My name's Chaz Bandra, so I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Innovation in Oxford. I have a chair in translational medicine. I head up a group called the SGC, and I'm the academic lead for our Dementia Drug Discovery Institute. In terms of pre-competitive science, I mean, for me, this is just a vehicle for helping to de-risk. De-risk new assets, de-risk new targets, de-risk new assays, etc., etc. But I think the benefits are that it potentially reduces duplication and wastage. I think it also increases reproducibility of data, which I think is incredibly important. And if we could do it from a clinical perspective, I think potentially it will reduce the number of patients who are exposed to molecules needlessly.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Jackie Kamel. I've been with Genentech for 8 years and now moved into the Roche space of the company. So Roche and Genentech is one of the same company these days. My background is all in clinical development, but why I'm here is that we've set up 2 years ago a collaboration with 26 leading academic centers around the world to really try and bring everybody together to accelerate cancer immunotherapy development. We're 2.5 years in now. We're already seeing some fruits of some of the collaborations. We're working with both bench scientists, pure translational scientists, and clinical researchers. So it's a true collaboration across the entire development field, and it's very much hand in hand with our organisation. So we call ourselves the 27th Centre. It was born out of the head of early clinical development at Genentech saying, look, we can't do all this on our own, and there's some fantastic technologies and people out there that we really need to be working with. There are a lot of naysayers initially saying, but these are competitive institutions, they're not going to share with each other. We've got to break down a lot of barriers and thinking about data sharing. We've got to break down barriers internally as well about data sharing, because we obviously are one of those centres. We need to share our data, share our pipeline. But yeah, so I'm here 2.5 years into this collaboration. I've got some great insights and learnings into working with some difficult academic centres, some very positive experiences, and already we have some good data coming out of this collaboration.
Morning, I'm Martino Picardo. I'm here in my capacity as chairman of Discovery Park, the ex-Pfizer site at Sandwich, and you'll hear a lot in the next 12, 18, 24 months about some of the pre-competitive collaborative opportunities that we're going to be building, hopefully working with Pfizer, particularly in the clinical, regulatory, development, manufacturing space. And that's a whole new ballgame for me, having been in innovation, particularly around R&D and drug discovery. I just wanted to very quickly make reference to some of the experiences I've had in this pre-competitive that didn't occur to me as being pre-competitive when they actually happened. It goes all the way back to being a science director at what used to be Amersham Pharmacia, where we called open early access to technologies, particularly high throughput screening technologies, to pharma in a way that it was pre-competitive and there was no IP encumbrances, and I'm sure we'll come back to that, all the way through to being on a campus with the University of Manchester, first campus-based incubator in Europe, where it thrived on having pre-competitive engagement with external companies as well as the spin-outs coming out of the university. That was quite innovative at its time, and it was the first accelerator program in the UK at its time. And then to becoming the CEO, first CEO of the Open Innovation Campus at GSK, where we were building, and we were one of 5 or 6 GSK experiments in pre-competitive. We used to call it Open Innovation. People don't call it that anymore, but it's still out there. And it's hugely successful, and there are lots of case studies that hopefully we'll get into as we progress. And the idea is to use all of that experience. I'm a dating agent, if you haven't guessed already. That's what I do. I work in that pre-competitive space, talk to one person and make things happen.
Good morning. My name is Araz Raouf, and I'm heading the external early drug development within Janssen R&D. Before this role, I was heading the drug discovery globally for Janssen. And before joining Janssen J&J, I actually worked in a small biotech company called Elan Pharmaceutical Technology, where we had multiple collaborations. Of course, many of you know Janssen and J&J have pioneered the external innovation space, and we're truly source agnostic to innovation. So we work on internal projects, but also externally. We have multitude of collaborations with startup companies, academia, small biotechs, and we have been adapting ourselves really to be able to work with that. So internally, my mission is really external focus, and we are helping small biotech companies, academic group, etc., how to accelerate the value of an idea to a product by mobilizing, of course, our R&D know-how and expertise, which is in great need actually in the European space.
Great, thanks all. And as I said, what a wonderful panel to get into to address this topic. One of the things that we heard yesterday from Natalie Moll, who's the Director General of FBIA, was a call to action really, which is around finding different ways to collaborate. Well, aren't pre-competitive partners just a fantastic way to, and a different way to collaborate? And maybe I could get a perspective, Araz, from you around that, and your thoughts around the value of this type of collaboration. And particularly as well, she was talking about breaking down silos and operating in a different way within this industry. Has that been your experience?
Yes, and as I said, that we are very source agnostic to innovation, but personally as a scientist, I see a great value for pre-competitive at the early discovery phase. I think there are exciting ideas. We're good at science in Europe. There are excellent opportunities in academic groups and the consortia we are building. And at an early discovery where there is a very much an interesting biology, I think it's a great opportunity to put our thoughts together and work collaboratively and advance that idea and establish perhaps the relevance of that, piece of target or biology in a disease. And what I love to see is a continuation. Often we create that value, but then going back to the previous panels, how we will create more entrepreneurship in Europe, that we should think about business models and how we would actually translate this exciting science that comes out of a pre-competitive environment into something more tangible, so there would be a continuation of the idea moving forward. And of course, it creates more buzz in the biotech environment in Europe as well.
And Martino, just thinking about small companies and how they operate, is this type of partnership, this type of collaboration beneficial to them? And this way of thinking differently about collaborating, is this something that they're really enthused about?
It's undoubtedly of benefit to them, but it's a large risk for them because biotechs tend to be based on single bits of IP or opportunity, and therefore pushing them to engage. It's, I talk a lot about having that appetite to engage. Anybody that's heard me talk before will hear me talk about the bumper car model. You build a building next to one of the biggest pharma in the world and things happen. They go for coffee together and they talk to each other, and eventually they turn around and say, well, what do you do? And all of a sudden there's an opportunity. And the Puridify story at Stevenage, 100K business plan competition, ultimately acquired by GE, and GE now have a development lab there, but the technology was validated by GSK. So the perfect storm of an academic startup who took the opportunity and took the risk to engage, didn't worry about their IP, they had it protected, but it didn't stop them. It's that appetite to engage, take the risk. Malcolm Skingle at GSK, bless him, always talks about give a little to get a lot.
So there's a bit of a transport theme here. So Jackie, in the last session, actually, you spoke about getting people on a bus, and now we're hearing about bumper cars, and it seems to be a bit of a theme. But Jackie, I suppose one of the things that Roche seems to have done particularly well is in the data space and really thinking about data differently and sharing data. So could you give us a bigger insight into that, please?
So we do see a lot of what this network that we've built for cancer immunotherapy is about sharing data. That's really, although there's a lot of research within it, we're now moving into more of a secondary data analysis, research sharing. And what we've actually done to enable young scientists across the network, so really some of these early career scientists, we have a whole network of them. We've created a data visualization tool for them. It's homegrown. It was originally built for our own benefit, but the person who helped me with running this network said, wouldn't it be cool to let this out? Get this out there into the universities, get this out there into the sites, and let them play with our data. And so we had to move a few mindsets, but what we've done is we've actually released this visualization tool into the different hospitals with all sorts of scientists from postdoc level to senior scientists. We've loaded up our own some of our own phase 3 data. We're looking to put some of our earlier data and earlier molecules into this with TCGA data, and we basically said go and do what you want. And they can actually, we're about to move into the next version where they can load up their own data into this particular system and just sit there and play with it. And it came with a warning, this is addictive. I mean, if you're a true scientist, you can play with this tool for hours doing all sorts of analyses. And we've had some great feedback. And actually, we've got our first publication coming out from releasing this tool with our data into the ether sort of thing.
What a fantastic example as well, and I suppose potential for significant disruption in terms of what you're doing. And one of the things that came across in the last session was around the herd mentality and how to break away from that herd mentality. That sounds like a great example of a way we could do that. Chaz, just coming to you and thinking about that last discussion as well, often we're really hard on each other as an industry. And we think that herd mentality is something which is really bad. And is that really the case? And is it something that in certain arenas we should be proud of?
Well, I don't think it's bad. I think what I tried to say earlier is that it happens in other industries, and we've been doing it forever, and it even happens in academia. And it's, you know, when we recognize that what we're trying to do together is to do something that is risky, it is long-term, it is expensive. And everybody wants to focus in areas where there's minimal risk, and that inevitably is areas where there's the most data. So it's not surprising. I suppose the one thing I would add to some of the earlier comments, I mean, in Oxford, what we've managed to do is pull together 9 large pharmaceutical companies, 7 different patient organizations, and probably across the world, 300 academic labs. And so, you know, this pre-competitive way of working, for me, it's just a way of pooling resources, pooling infrastructure, pooling expertise to de-risk targets and assets and so on and so forth. But I think there are many other advantages around reducing duplication, wastage, increasing reproducibility, training people, et cetera, et cetera. One thing we've not been able to do to date is we've not been able to pull in lots of biotechs into this consortium. And for the reasons I think Martin alluded to earlier, that sort of biotechs are focused on a single target, single asset. They're not going to give away their IP to this massive network, et cetera. We're starting to now engage with some philanthropists, so that will help accelerate the activity, and we're starting discussions with some of the regulators, et cetera. So, I mean, I'm just a great fan of, you know, I think what we're trying to do is so difficult and so expensive and risky. We've just got to break down these barriers, and we've just got to work together. If we don't, you know, we will not have a treatment for Alzheimer's in the next 10, 20 years.
Okay, thank you, Chaz. I will open it up to the audience in just a moment for any initial questions. But Martino, if I could come to you as well. Like, so there's a lot of sharing going on here, and potential sharing of IP. So, from a small company perspective, do they have to think differently about IP now? Is it seen as a significant risk to engage in this type of partnership for small companies?
I think it's very difficult to generalise, but I do think that there's a growing appetite to engage and to understand and appreciate that if you don't have the conversations, then you're not going to move forwards. So by that I mean that companies are now employing what Big Pharma have been doing for years, that whole red, amber, green. You know, if you're in a bar and you have a conversation with someone that's nothing to do with the IP, that's green. If you're getting closer to your IP, that's a bit amber, and you don't go anywhere near the red. So, you know, a lot of the incubators and the centres around, and we're certainly going to do that at Sandwich, start to educate and communicate and do a bit of mentoring around keeping calm around the IP. The other issue that is happening, and you know, there's a lot of beating up going on around the universities at the moment, and particularly the technology transfer organisations, and they're a bit sensitive and a bit precious about being perceived to give away their IP or overvalue their IP. So there's a whole debate going on around the UK, being led by Wellcome, being led by the industrial strategy, John Bell, to say, how can we do that bit better? And if we get that bit better, then the biotechs coming out of the universities will be better, more fit for purpose in having that conversation. But you know what? You know, I come back to the herding cats, or the herding of pharma. Sorry, I should behave myself. I call that feeding frenzy. And at Stevenage, we had that with the VCs. You know, I thought the best way forward was to have one venture capital fund. Absolutely not. Miranda will give you the current number. I think it's somewhere near 600 million of VC investment in that Stevenage incubator. It's probably more than that. Up. But the point is that that's come from 20 different VCs, corporate ventures, pharma, all over the place. So that's the kind of environment. And if you're in that environment, you're going to be less concerned about the IP because you're not going to want to miss out.
Right. Thank you, Martino. So, any questions from the audience? Any initial questions on lady in the middle?
Hi, I'm Rubina Ahmed from Fight for Sight. I suppose from the people missing from the panel are probably the charity and medical research kind of funding sector. You know, and you've mentioned the Wellcome Trust already. About Cancer Research UK, obviously, I've got colleagues here from the room there, you know, engage quite significantly with bringing together and driving forward those collaborations between the pharma and academic communities. You know, how do the panel feel that, you know, charities can engage more effectively in driving forward those collaborations? And, you know, are companies becoming more open to collaborating with charities as well?
Who would like to start, Ross?
Yeah, I think we are open to it actually from Big Pharma perspective to work with charities, especially around public health assets and opportunities there. I remember many years ago we had a collaboration for probably one of the innovative TB compounds that we came out, you know, Janssen developed with the Bill Gates Foundation, because of course they were very keen to provide that solution and make it accessible throughout the world. So there are actually, you know, awareness that to create a win-win situation for certain aspects of the portfolio, probably in our case related to public health, you know, compounds and drugs, that it would be beneficial to work with charity organization. Also from patient perspective, patient access perspective, and also hearing what is really, you know, needed from unmet medical need. I think the patient and charity groups are doing a great job actually creating that awareness and sharing those data with Big Pharma.
Thanks. I can see Chaz itching to get in here, so I'm going to come to Chaz next.
So I feel a bit embarrassed actually, because I should have mentioned charities. I mean, to be fair, the SGC was started by the Wellcome Trust and GSK. I think 14, 15 years ago, GSK realized that they just can't do this on their own. And the Wellcome Trust actually into our lab in Oxford have put to date more than £60 million. And that is what's enabled us to bring together all these pharma companies and academic labs and patient groups and so on and so forth. So thank you for, I hope there's nobody from Wellcome here, otherwise I'll be shocked.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I talk about universities, I kind of include where the funding for academic research comes from, and it tends to be from the charities. I mentioned Wellcome Trust because they used to be my joint venture stakeholder at Stevenage, and they did a phenomenal amount. And we had LifeArc on the side, MRC, and the charities are working directly with some of the companies. Alzheimer's Research UK funded an Open Innovation Challenge. We want to do more at Sandwich with Pfizer and the charities. So come one, come all. I think I've heard it a couple of times in the conference, and with all due respect, I think the charities have to come out and play in a more collaborative way as well.
Yeah, and just a share a personal perspective as well. And look, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a great challenge, and it's an omission, if I'm very honest, from this panel. And you know, in terms of maybe if we run the panel again next year, or some flavour of the panel next year, we should have a patient voice or a patient organisation voice in this panel. Because my personal perspective is that what I've seen in terms of engaging in this type of partnership is a real driver in the partnerships are the patient organisations or patients sitting on those panels. And part of that can really be around, as the panel has already said, providing a different perspective, a different insight in terms of endpoints, in terms of outcomes. But also it can be a real motivator for the project teams who are engaging in this type of initiative, and really spur them on to things which are greater than they initially thought. It's very easy in this type of partnership, as we heard, to get bogged down in some of the bureaucracy, and to also get bogged down in trying to resolve what is a kind of a natural part of forming a team, that storming piece. But what can help cut through that is when you've got patients involved and you've got patient organizations involved. So that's been my personal experience of this type of partnership, and how patients can be a real driving force. And thank you for the insight, and thank you for the question. Okay, other questions from the audience for the panel? So, Stuart, sorry, I'll come to you next.
Thanks. Very interesting, Stuart Dollo. Interesting to hear. We're talking more about sectoral partnerships at the moment in the pre-competitive space, but I'm interested in the panel's views on things outside the sector. So, and I'm not talking about digital or Google. I'm actually talking about people like HTA and regulators about how we can get them involved in shaping what the output is, so that when they come to review something, what does that actually mean in terms of their likelihood to approve?
Thanks, Stuart. Anybody like to take that involvement? HTAs, payers, early stage, maybe? Chaz?
So it's an interesting question. So at the moment, Stuart, we're trying to set up a national effort on aging. So basically trying to develop new therapeutics to treat multiple morbidities associated with aging. And so we've been talking with a number of our pharma colleagues and pulling them into it. And in fact, one of the things that they've really focused on is exactly that. What they want us to do by working together as a consortium of academics, clinicians, industry scientists, et cetera, they want us to develop new biomarkers and new ways of stratifying patients and validate those. And the belief is that because we've done it as a consortium with lots of farmers and lots of clinicians and patient groups, et cetera, it's more likely to be more acceptable to the regulators more quickly. So I think it's a great comment.
It's really interesting, and it's a real dilemma with the startups and the biotechs, but it tends to be one step removed. So I know we have these things called catapults that nobody ever talks about, but you know, in that cell and gene space, that's what the catapult's been doing for the local biotech community in the regulatory piece around cell and gene. The MDR, the Medicines Discovery, up in my home area of the Northwest, trying to do a similar thing. They will act as a conduit facilitator. And then the biotechs that need it as part of a CE marking or their FDA, they'll go straight there. So we definitely need to do more, but some of it's happening through second stage gating type opportunities, like the catapult.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Ilaria Mirabile from Cancer Research UK. I actually work within the Experimental Cancer Medicine Center Network, which is a network of centers of excellence for experimental medicine in cancer, and some of our centers are actually part of the network that you were discussing. We work also with the junior investigators, so basically the young clinicians or the young academics that will be leading the space in the future. So I would like some comments about how do we reach to the young people. I mean, the people that will be the one leading the space in 5 to 10 years. How do we manage to get there? I have some ideas, and I'm happy to talk you through those. I mean, we have this network, and it would be something really great if we could expose them to what you're discussing today.
Yeah, and if I could maybe broaden that question out just a little bit as well around the ability of these types of partnerships to bring those young leaders through and build capabilities. And Jackie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, this has actually been one of our key foci in the last year, is to really build up our young investigator network like you're doing. So I'd very much like to talk to you about it. We agree that this is really the future and this is what we need to be investing in. For us, it's been fairly easy to reach them because we have the senior scientists, senior clinicians already on board in the network. So we've created this network of young investigators. They've called themselves the Inflame Group. I think it's something to do with immunotherapy. But one of the things that we really felt was important for them is we have 26 centres around the world, and they're really great centres. It's just putting them together, connecting them. So they're now doing a lot of data mining work together. So we have some work being done with an investigator from Switzerland, from the Netherlands, and from Australia. And they've really got to know each other well, and they've started working together in this data analytics space. So when they move further in their career, they're already going to have a network to start building on their clinical work or their scientific work. They're going to have that global network to pull from. And it's one of the key areas we're working. We also bring them together from a technology perspective. So we've given them all an app that they can talk to each other. We do think having that global network between, MSK in the States and Heidelberg in Germany or wherever it is, just building those young people who watch their senior, the senior leaders in their organizations, always the same ones churning the papers out, sometimes take the lead authorship and whatever it is and and have all those networks. We're really trying to bring them up. So we've really focused on that. So I'd be very interested to hear what CRUK is doing, or the ECMC network. I am aware of the ECMC network, and I am aware our site's part of it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I can see Martino, Charles, itching to get in. So Martino, if we go to you, then
Yeah,
Charles.
just very quickly, I mean, around an incubator, that's what we do. But there are two guys over there who I beat up last night about here, just in the corner, and about sins of the fathers. Talk to them about sins of the fathers. But the key thing is that the young entrepreneurs do not have that patient benefit focus yet. So what you can do with them would be fantastic. We work very closely with things like the Innovation Forum, MENA and Panacea and Biostars. These are young entrepreneurs focused on next generation CEOs, CSOs. You can help them all.
Araz, did you want to come in?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, from industry perspective, also we are paying a lot of attention to create that networking. I mean, just to give you an example, in many of our R&D sites, we have incubator where startup companies actually, you know, put their first seeds and do actually even wet lab work. And there we have designed what we call a JPAL program where we actually create a networking. So we would like to see that ecosystem really connecting between the startup companies and young entrepreneur, and then the benefit of actually being close to a big pharma like us with a lot of expertise and know-how, not only from scientific perspective, but also from business management perspective, growing into CEOs, what you need to be, you know, taking care of, how you pitch for your, you know, next idea and how you get funding, all of that. And to take it a level even deeper, we have created another program where we really collaborate. And we don't own the IP, going back to the IP ownership. I mean, we let the entrepreneurs really take their ideas and be proud about the passion and all of that. And we try to, maybe you can call it de-risking, but what we would like to do is to create a win-win situation, you know, from science and technology perspective, so the entrepreneur would really succeed being close to us and working together.
Can I just add one thing? I think something that you've touched on, which is also really important, is providing the tools for these young investigators. And so what we think is really important is mentorship programs, and building a mentorship network with some of these senior scientists, senior clinicians. And we've found that a lot of the young investigators actually would prefer to have mentors outside of their own institutions. They like having mentors in different countries. And not even necessarily, you know, obviously cancer is a very diverse disease, not even in the same disease area. We thought that they were going to want to stick within their own bounds. It's not the case. But mentorship programs, providing these young group with the tools to be the young entrepreneurs, the scientists of the future, the clinicians of the future, I think is really, really key.
Charles, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I'm quite envious of in Boston is that I see what I see happening is you'll get academics at Harvard who will go off and work in Novartis, and then they'll go off and set up a biotech, and then they'll go to MIT, etc. Frankly, I don't think we see enough of that movement around, especially from academia to industry of some of these senior individuals. What we did do in Oxford a few years ago was that we wanted to train the leaders of tomorrow, and so we deliberately selected really bright computational scientists, mathematicians, statisticians, engineers to think about drug discovery problems. So their DPhil, their PhD, was on drug discovery. So initially they got some sort of tuition in genetics and structural biology and drug discovery, etc. And then when they did their DPhil, their 3-year project, it was actually with a supervisor from industry. Now, frankly, within the SGC, because we work with so many academics and so many pharma companies and so many patient groups, we are always inundated with applications from students wanting to do a DPhil in our group. And we just can't accommodate enough of them. And the reason they want to do this is they don't just want to have the interaction with lots of academics all over the world. They like the idea of having interactions with lots of companies across the world. And they also like the opportunity to go and work inside a company for maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc., because it also increases their probability of getting a job afterwards, etc. So it's a fabulous thing. We just can't train enough of them.
One final comment from
Just
Martino.
one last thing. I have a passion that we don't start early enough. We should be talking about schools to science part. we have all these kids who take science subjects and are not passionate, not excited, and have no idea around some of the career opportunities that exist at all levels, apprenticeships, work placements, undergrad, postgrad and beyond. And we need to do more in that space.
There's a question right down the back.
While we get there, can I make a comment, Sean? So just to follow on from Martina's point, which is always brilliant, I mean, one of my colleagues was in Stanford recently, and he was talking to the parent of a student at Stanford. And this parent said in Stanford, when his son started, in the first week, you know, they had this induction course, and they said, oh, we'll teach you physics for the next 3 years. But they actually said the expectation is that in your time here, you will try and set up a company. And this guy's son is actually now at the end of his second year, and he set up 2 companies. Yeah. So I think Martino is spot on.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ross Breckenridge. I'm the CEO of a startup. So my company's called Nanogap, and I'm the only full-time employee at the moment. So we're right at the beginning of our curve. I'd just like to say a couple of things. First of all, I agree that for something like Alzheimer's, this pre-competitive approach is clearly the way to crack a seemingly intractable scientific problem, and you know, there's no way around that. But I'd just like to sort of say something on behalf of my fellow minnows in the great feeding chain of life, in response to something that was just said. Our problem, we have lots of problems, we have lots of opportunities, but our problem is lack of money. I mean, that's the thing that keeps me literally awake at night, is running out of cash. And that leads us to have to be focused absolutely on what our investors want us to do. And it also makes us very jealous of any proprietary information that we have that we haven't yet had a chance to patent. So I think that it would, I mean, my previous life was as an academic medic, and you know, the world there is all about collaboration. But in my new world, we can't really afford to do that in the current model that we're in. However, I think there is an opportunity for these very large, well-funded incubators to have their own biotechs that are started with the proviso that they're part of the universe and they can do the higher risk stuff. I think getting VC-funded companies from outside in, I think is going to be difficult. I mean, I don't want to be a naysayer, but I've been sitting here the last 15 minutes just trying to figure out how I would justify that to the people on my board.
Great. Thank you for the insight and the question. Martino, you've seen lots of different startup companies at your time at Stevenage and now Discovery Park. Any insights or any help that you could provide the question?
It's incredibly hard, and anything I say now is either going to appear patronising or sycophantic, so I apologise, okay? But wherever you're based, please God, you've got some kind of ecosystem around you so that you're not A, alone, and B, you can tap into, you know, the non-dilutive fund, you know, all of the stuff. You see what I can feel myself being patronising here because you know all this, but get yourself a good mentor and get yourself someone who can open doors for you to that money. You know, we learned a long time ago in the incubation space, the golden triangle is people, infrastructure, and money. And if you don't come with the money or access to the money, you upset an awful lot of people. It's hard, and it's a long, long game, but it can be done.
Maybe just expanding on that point, I don't know whether there are other startups in the audience, but just thinking about that people perspective and the need to bring together people from different disciplines, and whether this type of partnership is a vehicle for that. Are there others in the audience who want to, this person at the back?
Hello, thank you. I'm Elodie. I'm from Visus Nano. We're a startup company, and we actually had a lot of support off both Martino and Miranda at SBC. And without their help, we just wouldn't have made the connections. And like you say, you're a dating company. You put us in contact with loads of mentors, loads of consultants and experts, and we just wouldn't have made progress without all their help. and all the expertise that we were offered. So, yeah, it's very important that you find someone that can connect you and be in the right place as well.
Thank you. And there's a question or comment here out at the front.
Thank you, Martin, for mentioning. So we are part of the Science Entrepreneur Club, and what we basically do is opening up the life science a bit more to the younger generation, but also accelerators and startups and VCs. And for our perspective, it's really important that we create the network, not just on a product-wise, but more on a social bit, so people really get to understand what's going on and what the life science really has to bring. And my question is mainly to ask, how do the big pharma really communicate that? I know you've got different programs, but how do you really go directly to the younger generation interested in entrepreneurship and innovation outside of the academic setting?
Jackie, maybe if I could ask you to take that, you had a good example from the last session as well.
Well, actually, I'm sort of less from that, but so we do take students into Genentech. So we do more. I don't know why that is, and maybe it's because I know more about it, because I was at Genentech longer than I've been in the Roche side of the company, but certainly in Genentech we take a lot of students in each year on different programs through the summer holidays, so we'll have them in through semesters. I mean, it's college students. So there's big programs to bring people in, really experience what it is in the different labs. In fact, we actually, our scientists look forward to having these students come in every year. It's a great program. It's not enough. There are limited places, I have to say, and obviously there's a massive need out there, and I think we could be doing more. I'm saying that there's probably is more. It's such a huge company. I probably don't know half of what's going on. All I do know is what's going on in Genentech in California, and there is a lot of students and kids. I think we've also got outreach programs where we go and talk in schools about sciences, life sciences, what it's like to be a scientist, what it's like to be in a pharma company. Again, I don't think it's enough, and I don't know what goes on here. I'm sure my colleagues on the panel do more. But you're right. We need to be doing what you were saying, into schools. Let's be doing more of that. I think career fairs are great. I remember being a student myself. I mean, if someone had actually, I think my career might have gone a slightly different angle if I'd had, and I love my career, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel I had the right advice. I didn't have the right input at career fairs to tell me what a career in life sciences was going to be. I'm married to an academic clinician, and dare I say it, he sort of says to our kids, I really don't think you should become scientists. You can become doctor, but I mean, maybe that's sort of, he's got tough labs, or he's tough to run his labs, or whatever it is. But I do think we need to do more at career fairs in general.
I think that's really important because when we speak to a lot of these academics or people even in graduate studies, that's exactly the problem. They know how the academic scene works, but what is out there in the life science, whether it's really going to innovation, but also job opportunities and careers, that's really lacking. That's what they're really missing.
Yeah.
Raz, I can see you waving there. So.
Yeah, I think we do some career mentoring, but also opportunities to talk to young talent. But quite honestly, I think we should do more. I mean, especially in Europe, my heart goes to the young generation because, and I have no children, but I have plenty in my family who really are very talented, but they actually, struggle how to be connected, how to network, and where do we see the opportunity, where are the life science examples. So I try to do a bit of personal mentoring at home as well. But putting that aside, I think there is a cultural component difference. I mean, anytime I go to US, and we have a huge, interactions there in the hot spots in Boston and San Francisco, the Bay Area, San Diego, I think culturally we ought to think about entrepreneurship in Europe differently. I think there is a significant skill shortages for entrepreneurs and mentorship, but also access to capital. I think that has been discussed. I think the governments, big pharma, and perhaps charity organizations should do more, because I see a great potential in the science that we see in Europe, but then there is a lack of continuation, how we would extract maximum value of all what we see in the European ecosystem.
Chaz, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, I can understand why in pharma and with VCs and with biotechs, we're very focused on this target in this disease. I mean, that's what we've done. And usually pharma's broken down into different therapeutic areas, and that's totally understandable. But I think what we know about drug discovery is that science often isn't like that. You know, drugs have often ended up in areas that they weren't initially intended. And I think somehow we just need to be a little bit more disease agnostic. Now, that's very difficult to do when you go to a VC or you want to set up a biotech. So I'm not quite sure how we get around this. And I'm just reminded, last week I was giving a talk in New York, and I met this wonderful lady who was working on alopecia. And she started working on alopecia because she herself suffers from it, her whole family has it. So initially she did some genetics, and the genetic hits suggested that there was some similarity between alopecia and celiac disease and rheumatoid arthritis. Based on this work, she took a Pfizer JAK inhibitor, which is currently used for RA, and she tested it in alopecia patients, and the hair came back. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it was just a small study, but literally the hair just came back. And then she started getting interested in the gut microbiome, and there was, you know, these patients with Clostridium difficile infections, they're given fecal transplants. So she looked at one of these studies, and within this patient group, there happened to be 2 individuals who had alopecia. And these 2 individuals who had alopecia and had the fecal transplant for the Clostridium difficile, their hair grew back. And I'm sitting there thinking, who the hell would have predicted it? And I think this is where I think academia needs to focus on much more risky things and, you know, much more speculative things. And one of the great advantages of creating these pre-competitive consortia is that we can focus on the risky, impossible targets, proteins, et cetera, et cetera.
Chaz, maybe we could just build on that as well in terms of the disease agnostic piece and thinking about some of the platforms, and you mentioned one of them is a microbiome, and thinking about that as it cuts across lots of different disease areas. And it does seem there's a lot of investment going into really understanding the microbiome in a disease agnostic way. But are pre-competitive partnerships, do they have a role in that space? And Jackie, I know that you've got an interest in this space, and I'll come to you after Chaz. So what is the role of pre-competitive partnerships in that space where we really don't fully understand the science?
So I think anything that's risky, anything that's expensive, anything that takes too long, I think we should, it makes sense to try and do it pre-competitively. It makes sense at least to try and do the early bit pre-competitively, where you're pooling resources, infrastructure, expertise, etc. And you know, so one of the models I like, and nobody's really talked about that today, is the model that Dave Cameron set up. You know, this sort of Alzheimer's. He set up this dementia discovery fund. You know, so and the thing I like about it is that there's government funding, there's funding from 2 charities, I think there's funding from now 6 or 7 farmers, now they've got funding from Gates and a pension fund in the US, and they've aggregated something like $350 million literally to create companies in Alzheimer's or dementia, etc. So they've taken, it's pulling together all of these organizations and funds and resources and expertise, but the other thing that's beautiful about it is they've got a VC fund to manage it. You know, assuming the VC fund is going to manage it aggressively with outputs and milestones, et cetera, et cetera. I think we should be doing that in other difficult areas. You know, why not do it in mental health or, you know, some psychiatric diseases, et cetera. You know, what upsets me is when I look across the biomedicine is the amount of duplication. It is just a waste. We're not generating enough new medicines. The pot of money for doing biomedical research isn't going up. With an aging society, we desperately need more medicines, but we've got horrendous duplication. I mean, Jackie will know that today there's more than 1,000 clinical studies underway with anti-PD-1 or anti-PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitors. What a waste.
Yeah.
Jackie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I made that point at the panel last year, actually, that there are over 1,000 PD-1, PD-L1 studies, and it is a waste. I would like to think that we're moving on from that, but it's not going away. You're right. I think the point that Sean was talking about with microbiome is it is disease agnostic. It is some fabulously interesting data coming out of the work in the microbiome. And this is a space where you get into conversations a bit like the bumper cars, and you do start talking about microbiome. People wake up and go, yeah, no, we're doing something in microbiome as well. And you start talking about how we're going to get poo samples from everybody in the room. And honestly, this is going on around our whole organization, so much so that actually within IMCOR, we've now set up some microbiome core labs. And in fact, Sean and I were talking yesterday about whether we can start collaborating on microbiome samples, because what we're trying to do is pool microbiome samples to really move this science ahead. I met a VC, somebody who invested in VC on a train when I got stuck in Germany last week on the way home from ESMO. She only invests in microbiome companies. I mean, there seems to be a bit of a darling at the moment, but the point is, to your point, it's all coming together, actually. This is a science that we're all going, wow, who would have thought you could influence a disease so strongly by sorting out your microbiome, your microbiota, and is it fecal transplants? Is it, what is it going to be? We don't know. The predictability of microbiome, to predict outcome in certain medicines. We've done some work to see, you've seen the antibiotic work. If you give antibiotics with cancer immunotherapy, you have a poorer outcome. There's a lot of data in this field, and I do think pooling these poo samples is a way forward.
Yeah.
Pooling poo, that's the final word.
So if you've got nothing else out of this session, is poo is cool. But I've just had a signal that we've only got a few minutes left, so I just want to open it up to one final question from the audience and see if there is any final questions or any final thoughts or comments from the audience.
Been a crap session.
So maybe what I'll just do then is ask the panel to share some final thoughts, and really is around what do you see next in pre-competitive partnerships, and what excites you about what you see next in pre-competitive partnerships. Raz, could I start with you and get your thoughts?
Well, I think the huge areas of opportunities in like what Chaz mentioned, in cool areas of early biology. Microbiome is one area, but I see really a lot of opportunities in many other biological targets, etc. What I would like to see as well is downstream value creation, and maybe at the late stage development also we see some opportunities there, and it has been coming through genetic sequencing, stuff like that, and biobank, where we have easier accessibility to patients and stratification and etc. But I see opportunities now in both early and late. And in early stuff, I think let's go beyond what we know currently around genetics, epigenetics, more into the cool areas of science and biology.
Thanks, Martina.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to answer your question, but if you look over your left shoulder, the gentleman in the middle of that table is Brian from Pfizer, and he will tell you they're currently recruiting between 30 and 40 people. Go talk to him. That's my dating agent in action. Open innovation in action, fantastic example. You two challenge now, make that happen. Make it happen in a pre-competitive way and find a charity. I was about to say, open innovation, pre-competitive collaboration is not a panacea, but exactly how Chaz defined it in the difficult, tough, high-risk areas, it is the perfect way to do it. And there are plenty of examples that Miranda can give you from Stevenage, and I'm excited that we're going to have examples to share with you, hopefully this time next year, from Sandwich.
Thanks, Martina. Jackie?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing here is a breaking down of a lot of barriers and silos, and I think that's really what we're trying to get to, so that we can all be working better together to reduce the duplicity that you talk about. And I think we do need to be doing it. The money that is wasted in duplicity is really, really shameful, actually. I think you made a great point that there is nobody from the charities and the patient voice on this panel, and I think we've all heard that. And the other thing that I've really taken from this is we should be doing more with young people and take it down to schools and be doing more, and I'll certainly be taking that back myself.
Chaz, final word.
Well, I think what I'd like to just finish off with and just say that I believe Europe is the global leader in open innovation and pre-competitive science. And I think within Europe, frankly, I think the UK is the world leader. And I can demonstrate that with lots of data, and I think Martin can, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I think the other thing that we've got going for us in the UK is that we've got some amazing infrastructure. The NHS, some brilliant universities, catapults, project like Genome England, UK Biobank, etc., etc. Frankly, if we can't exploit that for the benefit of patients across the world, I don't know who will.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending this session. And hopefully you've got a greater insight into pre-competitive partnerships and some of the value of pre-competitive partnerships, and if nothing else, that poo is cool. So thanks, everybody.